Welcome to Real Coaching Radio, the podcast for coaches by coaches. We are here to teach you how to get the most out of your clients and yourself. This is where beauty meets the beast, brains meet brawn, and science meets, well, bro science. Welcome to Real Coaching Radio. Welcome. This is episode 17. Today, me and Mark, we talk about muscle building and strength plateaus, how to break through them. Like always, it all comes down pretty much to recovery. If you've listened to our autoregulation podcast, we're pretty much going to harp on around similar things. You need to be recovered enough to be able to train as hard as you want to. You can literally only train as hard as you recover. But without any further ado, let's begin the episode. Basically the volume on this stuff, because hence why the yoga mats and stuff. Look.
Oh, I didn't even notice that. They strategically placed?
No, I've basically been looking out at how to make the sound just sound a little bit better, and obviously the first thing it says was don't be in a completely square wooden room, and we're in a completely square wooden room.
Sweet. So do these make it less square?
My hope was...
Is that the theory?
So, like, obviously we have these little, like, foam pads around the mic, yeah? And they're supposed to, like... Apparently, like, sound bounces really well off of flat surfaces.
Right.
So, like, these little foam pads with the little, like, jaggedy bits, it, like, basically soaks up all of the sound.
Right.
And then what they say is, like, put cushions everywhere if you don't have, like, these... Because, like, these sound pads, you can have giant sound pads. And I've just kind of gone for, like, well, what could soak up some sound in this room?
You need to, like, do a podcast on a bouncy castle or something.
You need to be in, like, one of those, like, safety rooms.
Yeah.
Like, where there's just, like, pads all over the walls.
Yeah,
and, like,
padded room.
Yeah. But until we're millionaires... yoga mats are pretty much going to be the thing that basically
same thing, isn't it, really?
I mean,
it looks the same.
It doesn't cost anything. This is kind of my thought. First, before we got into plateaus, I want to talk about your training. Obviously, it's changed now compared to the last time we spoke on the podcast. You started going into, 3 strength days and 3 cardio days, or does it change?
Well, yeah. So it has changed. I was doing 6 days, and I was doing 3 dedicated just strength days, and then 3 cardio days. The strength days would alternate. So week 1, as an example, would be 2 upper, 1 lower. Week 2 would be 2 lower, 1 upper. So essentially I've got 2 upper and 2 lower. So I've got 4 workouts, but I only train 3 times a week. So they just alternate essentially. And then I was doing 3 sort of pure fitness days. That has changed. Well, yeah, that's kind of changed a little bit. I'm just dropping a little bit of fitness now into some of my other sessions. So I'm still doing 3 strength sessions a week, but I'm doing an upper, lower, and a full body now. So it's switched a little bit. And then I'm still doing definitely 2 fitness sessions, probably 1 more. But as you know, we did some filming at the weekend because with my brother decided to do something stupid. So there's going to be a lot more cardio coming in.
Yeah. So changing up how you've started to train, like, because what were you doing before? You were doing kind of just a bit of mix, like your strength and conditioning would be in the same session.
Yeah, I'd start with like some strength work, and then there'd be some conditioning stuff at the end of my sessions.
And why did you go about changing that?
2 reasons. For me, it was just the biggest reason was time. I was finding my sessions were becoming quite long. And I just didn't really have with everything else I've got going on. I just didn't really have the time to do what I wanted to get done. And then I just get annoyed because I didn't get my session completed, and then because I was annoyed, the rest of my day was just a nightmare, basically. And then secondly, I found that which this actually wasn't a reason, but after doing a week of it, this became a good reason. I just found that I was able to get, obviously, when you're doing strength work, so like heavy back squats or that sort of stuff, compared to when you're doing burpees and thrusters and whatever else it might be, there's a very different mindset that you've got to get into. And I just found, for me, separating the two sessions just allowed me to really get involved in this one mindset and just be like, right, this is a heavy strength session. This is where my head needs to be. This is the work I've got to do. Or, I've got a high heart rate, high output, fitness-based session. This is where my head needs to be. And even down to things like, I can use this playlist, so like this music for lifting heavy, this music for more cardiovascular based work. So yeah, I just found that the whole mental side of things, separating them, allowed me to get into a pretty good mindset for them.
You could probably put more into each session then, because you're not like and an in between, like that. I suppose that transition between going from strength to cardio in the same session can just be like, when it comes to me, for example, so like if there's something I really want to work on, I'll put that at the start of my sessions. Yeah. So like if I'm going to do, like at the moment, for example, I always found I'd put core at the end, right? I put some core work at the end, and it comes to the end and I'd be like, nah, you know what? Like I'll skip that. And so I've decided like every time now, or at least once a week, core is the first thing I do. So then I go in, I do that, and I can carry on with the rest of my session. Yeah.
There was a time I did that for years ago now. Basically, when you remember not remember because they're still about, like TRXs. Yeah. When they first came into the fitness industry, I guess probably like, I swear this was like not that long ago. It might have been the 90s, but it weren't.
Was I alive?
Maybe he was maybe drinking a bottle, but maybe. When TRX like first came about, I started using it quite a bit. And I would do that same thing. I just do like 10 minutes of core work at the start of every session. Yeah,
and it's just that kind of breaking up gives you, like you say, a lot of training I think gets forgotten about as the mental aspect of it, but you've got to be in the right place to go and train. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like trying to pull something out of your ass when you're hanging after a strength session, like, and you've got to do you're probably not getting the most out of that cardio session anyway. So, the thing we want to talk about today, the main part of today's episode, I can't say the word. Can you say the word?
Try.
Plateaus.
Plateaus. Yeah, plateaus.
I always say plateaus.
Plateaus. Maybe that's like
la-di-da.
Tomato, or like grass and grass. Like I say grass, Kate says grass.
Grass.
Maybe you say plateau.
So a plateau. Is that right?
Plateaus, yeah.
Plateaus.
Plateau.
We're going to talk about plateaus. Do we do muscle building and strength plateaus today?
Yeah, I reckon we go with strength.
Yeah.
And like we can link that into building muscle a little bit, and then we can do a separate podcast on weight loss plateaus.
Yeah. I feel like first thing, what would you class as a plateau for strength and muscle building? Because people will come in, they'll have one bad session, and they'll go, I've hit a plateau.
Yeah.
How do you know in your own training? Like, is there been a time that you've trained and you've found yourself hitting a plateau? Or like, I mean, for me, genuinely, I don't think I've ever hit a plateau. I think all this ever happened is either I'm really tired because I've probably been out on the piss the weekend before.
Yep.
So I'm just not feeling that session, or my mindset, I pretty much don't have the balls to do what I've got to do.
Yep. Yeah, I would say like if you're going, I don't know, maybe 3. Let's say you're in a training cycle where you're repeating exercises, which you should be. If you're not, you're just winging it, really. Where you're repeating exercises, and if you're struggling to kind of either hit prescribed weights or go heavier than what you previously achieved, and you're maybe struggling to do that for 3 weeks, maybe.
I say 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Because if you go in 1 week and say you're like trying to go heavier on your back squats and you can't.
Mm.
And that might just be an odd session. If you come in the next week and the same thing happens, you could think, right, like, did I actually take into consideration why I missed it the week before? Like, have I looked at all of the external factors going on, or am I just looking at this one session? Like, what are you doing differently, and try and basically work that out for your third session?
Yeah, I think 3 weeks is a good place to go, because I think especially if we're talking like general population, I think 3 weeks is a good place to go, because also I think if we go to 4 weeks or beyond, the general public are probably going to start becoming disinterested.
Yeah.
And then again, you're going to lack adherence, you're going to lack consistency. We know that both those two things are key drivers.
So if someone comes in and they cannot progress in a 3 week period, so they come in week 1, they can't progress, come in week 2, they can't progress, and then week 3, same thing, can't progress, would you say, okay, now you've hit a plateau?
Well,
I know there's loads that go into it.
Yeah, I guess if we were to just kind of like put a stamp on it, we could say that.
Yeah.
But I would also kind of like, yeah, we'll get into it.
Okay, cool. So in that context of things, what is the things to be thinking about around plateaus, in the sense of, when I go in and I do miss these lifts, like on the first week, like what do I need to look at to make sure that I don't hit a plateau? Like, what's the reason I've hit this plateau? Is it because like I just can't lift anymore? Like, what are the main reasons that I need to be thinking about or looking at?
Well, I would say let's start at the very beginning.
Yeah.
I would say, first of all, kind of hopefully, whether you do it yourself or you've got a coach that does it for you, you should be kind of planning over a period of time. So as an example, I will program essentially in what I would call like 12-week phases. So I will have a skeleton for my clients of what I want the next kind of 12 weeks to look like. And I will then break that down into 4-week components. So we'll have a target and we'll have a focus for 4 weeks. The structure will look very similar for 4 weeks so that we can monitor and we can see progress. Then the following 4 weeks, the structure across a week in terms of what they do on certain days, so whether it be like upper body or lower body as an example, might remain the same, but the exercises might switch, the rep ranges might change, potentially the tempo might change, and then again for the following 4 weeks, so we're week like 9 to 12 now, the same thing will happen. And then at the end of the 12 weeks, we'll kind of like give everything a bit of a refresh and go again for another 12 weeks. So I think to ensure that you're giving yourself the best opportunity is, whether you do 12 weeks, whether I break that down into the 4 weeks as an example, there's clear guidance either from me given or from your coach given to you, or in your mind if you're writing your own programs, on what that progress is going to look like, what that progression route is going to look like, so you know where you need to begin. And what I'm trying to say is, which we've discussed on other previous podcasts, is kind of don't go in on week 1 and do, 8 reps on a back squat. Then the following week you're doing 8 reps and you add 15 kilos to what you did on week 1, because you're going to figure out very quickly that by week 3 you probably can't add any more weight.
So that's my point, is like, have you actually hit a plateau, or are you just being unrealistic with your expectations?
Yeah.
You have to, there's a way that we spoke about reps in reserve, and I feel like to give you guys an understanding of when you first go in on, say, that first session of that first week, sometimes I would give people and say, like, right, just have between 2 to 4 reps in reserve. And I say that because, like, who really knows what is all subjective? You've got to be training for a long time to be able to understand how many reps you actually have in reserve, how close you are to that failure point. And if you're in a brand new rep range that you've never been in before, then it's going to be really hard for you to grasp if you're not really like aware of what you've been doing previously. So I'd always say, if you go in with that mindset of having 2 to 4 reps in reserve, and then next week I just say to you, add 2.5 kg to the bar or do 2 extra reps, and you can kind of progress on a really slow, kind of methodical way of doing it, rather than just going in and going, no, I feel good today. Like, I'm going to bump some weight on.
Oh, so like, remember on, Day was it?
It was Monday.
It was Sunday. Remember when you messaged, should I do this or should I do this? Like, just do what your program says.
Yeah.
Because you got all excited and we're like, I feel good. We'll go heavier.
I come in. I don't take pre-workout because it affects me really easily. So I took like 1.5 scoops of pre-workout, and that doesn't sound a lot, and it's a really mild pre-workout. And I was like,
it's basically Lucozade.
It's not even Lucozade, if I'm honest. It's like a Barocca. And I basically come in, and I had 150 kg for 4 on a back squat. And my other option, I say it was my other option. Basically, the week before, I'd done 150 for 3. And in that first set, it's between 2 to 4 reps. And I was like, but I could do 160 for 2. And it's like, my clear progression is just do another rep. It's not bang 10 kg on the bar. Yeah, don't get excited, basically.
Yeah. Sometimes it's difficult to, like, you kind of, you get excited, you're feeling strong, you can run away with yourself, and it's not the end of the world.
No, and the thing is that you have two things there. Like, ultimately, 150 for 4 could potentially be harder than 160 for 2. Like, in a sense of how hard that will be for me to do, because I find lower rep things I can do quite easily. Mm-hmm. As soon as my form starts to break down, that's when it's really struggle, because you're obviously fighting to keep yourself in a good position as well. And that's the thing that got me on the weekend, was just like, 160 for 2 sounds good, and it's probably going to be easier.
So then you definitely made the right decision, because you chose, ultimately for you, the harder option.
Exactly. And that's the thing. You have, like, the reason there is programming is because, I suppose, to understand if I hit a plateau, I would need to look back and see what I'd done previous weeks. And is what I'm trying to do now way too much? Is it actually the correct place I should be? So 150 or 4, if I missed that, for example, that is when I could look back and go, right, next week I have to try and hit that again. If I don't, then we can talk about looking at other things.
Yeah. And just a point on that reps in reserve, I like that. For those people that are unsure, like, where's 2 reps in reserve? Where's 3 reps in reserve? Like, I don't really know how many I've got left in the tank. Like, go the other way. Go 1 too many, and you'll soon figure out how many reps you got left in the tank.
Yeah, and it's really, really hard, because, like, when you get up to your current, like, true strength potential, right? So, like, what you can currently lift, when you get closer to that, the kind of margin for errors becomes really small, and it means that, like, the difference between sometimes hitting a lift and not hitting a lift could be just positioning. So when you go in and you're not really sure, like, again, it doesn't matter too much, because of it still gives you a clear progression, and soon you're going to get to a point where you have 0 reps in reserve. Yep. Do you know what I mean? So even on that basis, like, I would rather be cautious and do too little than do too much, because there's always somewhere to go. If there's not somewhere to go, then what do we do?
Yeah. So I would say that's the first thing. Make sure you've got a clear progression route of where you're going to be going. And obviously you can auto-regulate as you kind of go across there, and, go back to our auto-regulation podcast, and you can figure out a bit more around that. So that would be the first thing to consider. I would then consider, if you feel, before we get onto a point of, like, have you actually hit a plateau? If you feel like you've hit a plateau, maybe consider, were you, like, mentally, were you in the right situation, and were you in the right place to do the session that you either had planned or are going to do, whatever it might be?
You have to be in the right mindset. I found that if I go, it's really strange. So, like, when I, kind of a tangent, not really a tangent, but make sure you have a log of everything you've been doing. So whether that's a pen and paper pad, whether that's an app, whatever it may be, just keep a log of what you've been doing, so it's easy for you to check by. And what I always do is I go into a session, I look back at what I've done the week before, and before I even put a bar on my back, I write down what I'm going to hit that session. because mentally, if I've already got it in my mind that like, right, I'm actually going to hit this, I'm going to hit this, I'm going to hit that, it's more likely to happen because that mental aspect and being prepared is really important.
Yeah. So definitely go into the session mentally prepared. If you didn't, as Charlie said at the beginning of this podcast, like if you didn't progress in 1 week, first of all, just you haven't hit a plateau just because you haven't progressed on 1 week. But firstly, my first place would kind of, mentally, did you go into the session prepared enough? And then ultimately, what a plateau actually is essentially you're just not recovered enough. There's kind of, rotating exercises, rotating training programs, exhausting exercises. I completely understand all of that, but I would, exhausting exercises for the most part is only really left to the elite strength / bodybuilding athletes, kind of like general population, or even, I don't know, semi-professional amateur sporting athletes. Like, there's realistically very little need for you to rotate exercises. You could squat and deadlift every week for 10 years. You don't really need to rotate the exercise. When you've hit a plateau, and truly hit a plateau, is ultimately we got to start looking at recovery strategies.
Yeah. You can only train as hard as you can recover.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for me, like when I go in and train, majority of the time it is just mental. If I don't do something, it is purely that I wasn't ready for the session. I wasn't prepared enough. And probably like if I had poor sleep, that's probably the biggest thing for me. Poor sleep the night before, and I've got to go in and do a session when my eyes are still glued together.
Yeah.
You're not going to get the most out of it, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. So, people, if you ask, well, how do you know you've hit a plateau? People are like, oh, well, I haven't got stronger. I'm not getting bigger. Both of those things ultimately come down to the fact that you are not recovered enough. You're not eating enough. You're not sleeping enough. Your hydration status isn't good enough. So, you're not recovered enough to be able to go back into the gym, do the session that you've got planned, and lift more weight. So it all comes down to your recovery strategies.
And if you're sat there thinking, oh, well, I want to gain muscle, I want to gain strength, but I don't want to put on too much body fat. So like Mark's saying, I'm probably not eating enough. Well, ultimately, yes, you can build muscle and you can build strength if you're in a calorie deficit, but it's really, really hard. So your better option is just to be like, right, let's try and work my nutrition out so I can ultimately have enough calories to actually fuel my workouts throughout the day and to fuel my recovery process, because it's not just fueling the workout you're doing then, it's like fueling you for the rest of the day to make sure you're actually recovering. Like, are you getting enough protein in? And like, this is where like carbs are your friend at this time. Carbs will really help you not only have energy in your sessions, but help recovery as well.
Yeah. If you're somebody who's wanting to gain strength, but certainly wanting to gain muscle, the limiting factor for you almost comes down to how much fat you're willing to gain.
Yeah.
It's as Charlie said, you can build muscle, you can gain strength in a calorie deficit, but optimally, if you want to do it optimally, you need to put yourself into a surplus.
And the reason for that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, muscle building is a signaling process, right?
Correct.
So what's the signaling process?
So we need to stimulate muscle protein synthesis.
Right. So because it is a signaling, it means that it doesn't necessarily matter how much kind of fuel you have. But what does matter how much fuel you have is the amount of energy you have going into that session.
Yep.
Like if you've ever tried to be in a deficit and still lift the same weight, so sometimes you do get a bit of a strength decline. Again, I could probably argue that could be some mental aspect of it and maybe not thinking around timings of your food, but that's like way at the other end. I'm talking big rock stuff at the moment. It's just, are you eating enough food? And like ultimately the amount of body fat you're willing to gain, I don't think it's I think it is just an ego thing then, really, isn't it? Like, you have to be able to look in the mirror and be like, oh, I'm pretty soft right now.
Yeah, and then if that's where you're thinking, I guess you've got to be the person. You've then got to start asking yourself questions. Oh, well, actually, is this what I want to do?
Yeah.
Because I know for me, like, yeah, I do. I'm always trying to get a little bit stronger, but I also know that I feel a hell of a lot better. Just my productivity throughout the day, my mood throughout the day. I just generally feel a lot better when I feel leaner and when I feel fitter. So in terms of when my cardiovascular fitness is quite good, and both of those things don't. I'm going to say aren't going to hinder my progress to get stronger, because I can still get stronger in that scenario, but I can't get really strong in that scenario. But so again, it's about prioritizing what you're wanting to achieve. I could gain a load of body fat and get heavier and then get even stronger, but that would then have a negative impact on my productivity throughout the day, the way I generally just feel throughout the day, my energy, my mood throughout the day, and I've got too much other stuff going on that I'm not willing to sacrifice that.
Yeah, and you have to be honest with yourself with that. I flutter between, and it's really difficult to get it right. And I feel like if you're someone out there who is wanting to put on muscle, but you're afraid to put on body fat, you need to honestly sit down and think, like, what do I really want? Because you can't, unfortunately, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Though you probably should if you're trying to put on a bit of size, but try your best to come to terms with that fact that you're going to put on a little bit of body fat. If muscle building is your goal, and I mean, like, is your true goal, you've thought about it, you want to get bigger, like, you have to eat more food and you have to run the risk of putting on body fat. And it's, I guess, keep an eye on your weight and just make sure you're not going up too crazy. Like, I'd probably say, would you say like half a kg a week for muscle gain? Like,
in terms of how much they want to gain.
So like, if someone's looking to build muscle, would you say looking at their weight, and just making sure it's not going past like 0.5 kg each week increases? For like, because otherwise, if you are going to
but then you could probably make that a little bit more really, like, so what I'm looking for, relevant to the individual, because like, you got someone who weighs 100 kilos gaining half a kilo, you've got someone who weighs 50 kilos gaining half a kilo. That's a big difference between those two. So I'd probably say maybe like 0.3% of body weight.
Yeah, because that's one of the Eugene Teo.
Yeah.
So that's what he basically says, between depending on your body weight. He says like 1% of your body weight.
Yeah.
So if it's 1% of your body weight, that's what he'd kind of go by. So if that was, Yeah. So
I'd go off percentage of body weight more than just like pure kilos.
So if you are worried about putting on too much fat, maybe use that as a rule. So what's my body weight? What's the percentage I can gain?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously there's these limits in there. Like, you could gain pretty good, but again, like, you got to look at the foods that you're consuming. You still want to consume the same good food. So like, good quality protein sources, good quality carbohydrate sources, good quality fat sources. Not just living off like Five Guys and Krispy Kremes all week.
I wish I could.
That would be good. That would be good, wouldn't it? That would be really good. But yes, so still eating the same high quality foods, just more,
yeah, and like easily digestible foods as well. Like, that's why I love I love my mincemeat and rice, purely because like the rice is the mincemeat's pretty much already digested by a blender for me, so I've just got to like, it's just digests a lot easier, and you could get a lot of calories in that way. So going through like strength and muscle building plateaus, you have, obviously, you need to be following a structured plan.
Yep.
And then recovery strategies, I guess.
Recovery strategies is 100% the reason why you are not progressing. Like, the amount of clients that I've had so you generally get two types of clients. You get clients who you've either got to push them a little bit and say, right, if for you to achieve your goal, like realistically, you need to be doing a little bit more than what you are doing. Or you get some clients who are the other end of the spectrum. That's like, yeah, I want to train 7 days a week, blah, 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 14 times a day. Just like, okay, right, let's slow down a little bit. We need to put some recovery in there. We need to give you some deload weeks, if you like. And just like, nah, not interested in that. Just want to like go hard all the time. Just like, all right, let's try it, shall we? Let's see what happens.
Hard work pays off, bro.
Yeah. And then you get so far down the line, you're just like, oh, I'm tired. It's like, yeah, told you.
It's like saying, I got a guy every 4 weeks, literally dies off a cliff because his body can't recover.
Yeah, it's just not recovering. So, but then, again, like I've had clients who've been in that scenario, and then for one reason or another, they've been forced to not train. Whether that be probably not illness, because that's not a good example, but whether it be they've been away with their family or gyms have been closed throughout lockdown, whatever it might be, but for one reason or another, they've been forced to not train for somewhere between 7 to 10 days. And then they've gone back into the gym and done a session, and the first message I get is like, oh my God, I felt so strong today.
Right. Oh my God. So I have a guy, and I'm like, I'm going to put recovery weekend. And he's like, why? And I'm like, because trust me, like, you'll benefit from it. And he's like, he texts me halfway through the recovery week, I feel bigger. And I'm like, yeah, it's because we were on this path of like, each time you go in and you do something, I always look at recovery, and you could put this in for like your rest times as well, but recovery as a whole, look at it as a massive water tank, right? And every single time you go into the gym, you drain a little bit of that water out. And now, don't get me wrong, there's water trickling in at the top, but I mean really trickling in. And every time you go and train, you probably remove more than that's actually going to trickle back in. So over the course of like 3, 5, 6 weeks, you're pretty much going to drain that tank, and it needs a long period of time for that tank to refill. And the reason that's easy to understand is because your body's exactly the same. If you go in and you train hard and you train hard and you train hard, all that's happening is like fatigue's increasing, and we're not getting enough recovery. That's why like you'll see some powerlifters basically get to a point where they're hanging out of their ass after a 12-week block. They'll take a week off and then they'll peak for their meet. And the reason they do that is because the same thing, you're going to slingshot from your recovery to this adaptation, and you're actually going to be able to adapt and actually break this plateau, I guess.
Yeah. So again, it's like people forget that, when you don't get bigger and stronger in the gym. When you're in the gym, you're breaking down muscle tissue and you're stimulating muscle so that when you sleep and when you eat, especially throughout the night when you sleep, like that's when key adaptations take place. Sleep has got to be a big recovery strategy for a lot of people. And I appreciate life gets in the way sometimes, and having, 8 hours of sleep. I was looking at something on social media the other week, and it was kind of, I can't remember who it was now, but whoever it was, he was going through his morning routine. And it was kind of like, oh, I get up, I spend 20 minutes doing whatever it might be, and then I go and make a coffee, and then I could like meditate for half an hour,
salt lamp,
and then and then I go for a walk, and then and just like, mate, I literally have a kid and 10 minutes to get out dressed and out the door. Like, no, not for me.
Yeah, you don't have to go extreme like that, but you need to find a way to, I guess, get optimal sleep and set your environment up for the best sleep. So your alarm clock.
Oh yeah, that is good actually. That's made a big difference, So whereas before it used to be my phone, and we all know what a iPhone alarm sounds like.
I swear to God, if you're like 80, that's like a heart attack waiting to happen. Like if you're old or you've got high blood pressure, an alarm from an iPhone honestly gives me a heart attack. You'll be like driving somewhere, or you'll be like stood in a coffee queue, and someone's alarm will go off, and the fucking everyone jumps.
Yeah. But anyway, so Kate bought this alarm clock, and essentially, I don't know exactly how early it happens, but I don't know, let's say you set the alarm, you want the alarm to go off at 5 or whatever, something like 4:30, it's a light as well, so something like 4:30, the light will just spends half an hour gradually just getting brighter and brighter, and it's genuinely wicked. Yeah.
I bet you wake up feeling actually
Oh.
rested rather than like
Yeah.
a
Wait,
gun
like,
to your head.
do you know what I mean? Like, yeah. So, that has made a massive difference actually. And I'm not even necessarily going to bed like any earlier, but I genuinely feel a hell of a lot better in the morning.
And that comes to like your circadian rhythm. So we kind of, it's pretty much, which is why like I think this is why people feel a lot more tired in the winter. But when it's darker, like basically tells us to go to sleep. So when you've got lights in your face and you've got like kind of you're staring at your phone all night, and then you just go, oh, I'm going to go to bed now. Probably not the best strategy you can use because it's going to take you a little while to actually settle down before you go to bed. I'm not saying turn your phone off like 3 hours before you go to bed and like walk around with a candle at night. I'm not saying that because let's be realistic now. We're all probably going to go on our phones. If you're busy, like I'm some days, like you the other night were up to like 3 in the morning, like doing work. And it's the same thing. Like if you're up late working and you've got shit to do, you've got shit to do. But give yourself the best chance. And like I said, blue blocking glasses are great for that. But also just having your environment in your room set up nicely. Like have your, honestly, I spent a lot of money on my bed, right?
Yeah.
And everyone was like, why have you done that? And I was like, because it's like the one thing that I really appreciate is like, I don't want to get into like a fucking cardboard box. Do you know what I mean? With a spring sticking in my spine.
Yeah.
And try and get sleep.
I remember the first gym I ever worked in, like the very first gym I ever worked in. And there was a member there and just chat to most of them. And kind of one day he was like, my dad told me that spend good money on a bed and shoes because you spend 8 hours in both. And I was like, good advice.
Check. That's going in the bank.
Yeah.
And that's true though, because honestly, when I literally get in my bed on a night time, I can fall asleep within like 5 minutes because it's that comfy.
Yeah.
And you need to set up your environment. Like Jess has curtains at her house, which is pretty much tracing paper, and her house backs onto a main road. So you have like this orange light shining in your face from like the street lamps. And like I wake up in the night and I'm like, is the TV on? Is there a light on? And no, it's literally just because our curtains are so shit.
Yeah, like blackout blinds are key.
Blackout blinds are key. So good sleep, good hydration, eat enough.
Yeah, loads of like vegetables. So like making sure you're hitting vitamins, minerals, micronutrients. All of those key things need to be done. And then ultimately just recovery from training. So like don't train 7 days a week. Do you need to do double days?
Yeah.
Like, do you need to train for 2 hours at a time? Did you really need to do 8 sets? Like, so again, all of those questions are difficult to answer as a blanket statement because it's going to depend on the individual. You know, if you've been training for longer and you're able to handle more volume, then you can do a bit more volume. And if you're new to training, your volume really doesn't need to be very high in order for you to get the adaptation. Ultimately, what we're trying to achieve for the individual is the minimum amount of work it requires for them to see some progress.
Yeah. Which is exactly why that reps and reserve thing is a really good place to start because it gives you a base point, which is really probably too easy. And I'd rather that happen because like you're then at some point along this journey going to find your, what I call sticking point, what your true 2 reps from max is. Because like each week, if you come in and add an extra rep or like I said, stick between that rep range and then build yourself up through weights and just keep moving and moving and moving. Some point or another, you're going to get to 0 reps in reserve and it's going to be a real battle. But the biggest, like the reason recovery for me, not just like all of the sleep and like recovery from training, but like if you expect to be able to go out on a weekend to do stuff and then come in on a Monday and hit like a PR on a squat or increase what you've done the week before, like you're crazy. Yeah. You are honestly crazy. Like when I look at my sessions, I came in last week and I looked at what I had to lift and I was like, fuck, I don't really want to do that. And if I was hanging, like that would have made it so much harder to do because mentally you've got to be in a position to go, right, I've actually got to do this now. Yeah. And then you can look at your recovery after that, like getting your nutrition on point, getting your water intake on point. All of these things probably the big rocks to focus on.
Yeah. And also, again, from the beginning, like focus your mind on kind of, right, what can I achieve in a year? Where can I be in 2 years' time? Rather than, I'm going on holiday in 3 weeks. Like this, I want to get in shape. And again, so like, because if you're in that mindset of wanting to achieve something very, very quickly, you're going to rush the process. And when you rush the process, you're either A, not going to achieve your goals, or you're B, you're going to get there. But in order to get there, you're going to have to feel horrendous to get there. So, play the long game. Strength takes years to gain. Years and years and years to gain. Muscle takes years and years and years to gain. So think, where can I be in 12 months' time? Where can I be in 2 years' time? Where can I be in 5 years' time, sorry. And gradually just chip away at that.
That's been the biggest, I think, change for my training has been the thought of like, there is no point in just, I know it sounds really strange, but like, when I focused on the end goal of what I wanted to achieve, not only did I get disheartened, but it just got to the point where I was like, I can't just, I feel so far away from this goal that it's hard for me to focus day to day because all I'm thinking about is this goal. So by working backwards and going, right, what have I got to do, working all the way back to present day and then going, right, so my biggest focus is to be able to squat 200 kg, but my biggest focus now is just to make sure that I eat every single meal that I've planned myself for that day, is that I drink water throughout the day, is that I train effectively in each of my sessions, I get good sleep, and those are the actual things I focus on. And it's the same with clients. So I've got a client who's like, I want to kind of lose all this belly fat and I want to like build some muscle on my glutes. What should I do? And I'm like, okay, so Tuesday and Wednesday, your one goal is to not eat chocolate. And they're like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. And whereas if I said to them, okay, so your goal, you've got to be in a calorie deficit, you've got to do this for 12 weeks, you can't do that, we're going to have to up your steps, you're going to have to, like that person's brain would explode. Like you cannot give too many things to focus on, and you cannot give something to focus on which is like really unreasonable. Like sometimes when you're stood at the bottom of the tree, you can't see the top. So if you're going for the top, if you're going for that goal at the top, you can't see it. If it's not attainable, then it's not attainable. So we always got to go for the low-hanging fruit. And it's the same with your expectations of your training and your goals for each session. Don't think about what you're trying to get at the end. If you've already methodically worked that out, then you just need to follow the process.
Yep.
Perfect.
Sweet.
Is there anything else you'd think about plateaus and stuff? I mean, I got it right that time.
I mean, like you can get into kind of changing tempos, changing exercises. Like you can get into all that, but in all honesty, in my experience of working with people, like that's not the reason they've hit a plateau.
No.
The reason they've hit a plateau is because there are so many other simple things in their life that they're not doing that, and ultimately it comes down to the fact that they are not recovered well enough. I mean, you might want to rotate some exercises so that people feel or stay interested, and therefore adherence is going to stay high, therefore consistency is going to stay high. But ultimately, the reason you're hitting a plateau is because you are under-recovered.
Perfect. I think we'll leave you with that. Thank you so much for tuning in. This has been Real Coaching Radio. Episode of the podcast. If you want to get in touch or ask any questions, please send an email to info@realcoachingradio.co.uk. If you're interested in joining the coaching world or enhancing your education, please head to www.myptcourse.com. There are level 2, level 3 and level 4 courses that will get you started in your fitness career. Thank you once again for tuning in. This has been Real Coaching Radio.